contenders are coming forth. Companies that had nothing to do with mountain biking before have now stepped into the arena of e-bikes. So how's this one going to do? It claims to be a podium level e-enduro bike. It's flagship bike for a company mainly known for motocross. But we'll quickly find out whether or not mountain bikers designed this thing. Is it a fraud gimmick, or is it exactly what the e-enduro bike series needs? So I wish I could demo more than just this ECC6 because it's the flagship bike and less people are going to be interested in its price point despite all of its advantages. But the ECC line is just one line in their enduro. They actually have ECA and e-enduro. They both have really nice setups and components and geometry and all the bells and whistles for a $5,000 to $6,000 e-mountain bike. A lot of people liked my Husqvarna Hardcross HC5 video, and I talked about how it was a really true, nice, hard-hitting budget e-bike for what it does, how it just had extremely high level components out of the box when a lot of bikes in this range from some of the higher brands just have a bunch of mid components. So GASGAS and Husqvarna completely decked out their mid-range e-bikes with super high-end components, which is not very common. They're both sister companies. They both had the same rep in the bike shop, so like they're just trying to make a really nice hard entry into something that's already very saturated. But I've got a lot of pushback on the price. A lot of people think that thing is too expensive. It's not worth it. They can go get a regular e-bike or a dirt bike for the same amount of money or less. That is a whole other video for a different time. But just for the moment, assume that these mountain bikes are worth the price. Even this one, which is like 11 grand. What does 11 grand get you that 6 grand won't? So for one, the DVO suspension, which is powered by WP, which is generally found in motocross suspension, they believe so heavily in their suspension that they put in all their top carbon models for the ECC and the MXC. Pretty bold move considering the love that the entire community has for both Fox and RockShox overall. So we'll be putting these to the test so I can give you my review on how they would do against the other two very established brands. It's got 170 up front and 160 in the rear. So for those of you who think 180, 170 is too much and 160, 150 is too little, well, there's a nice little Goldilocks zone, and it's got a full SRAM Eagle powertrain. Not just the XOT type, but it's got a full SRAM Bros motor, and the motor and the derailleur can talk to each other to give you an automatic transition, SRAM code, RSC, top of the line brakes, RockShox reverb. All those components alone would make the bike really ridiculous in price, so they kind of toned it down. I think they could tell it was getting a little too expensive. So instead of carbon rims, they give you some really nice aluminum downhill rims, these Newman Evolution EG30s. The bike is essentially all Bluetooth. There are no lines on it except for the brake lines, which they don't have Bluetooth brake lines yet. Got a really nice candy red finish with these moto style shrouds because GASGAS wanted to leave their kind of their lineage imprint on the bike. They look pretty cool, but I don't think GASGAS took into account how much the e-mountain bike community hates Surons and anything like it. So sometimes those shrouds may not be so well received. So if you don't want to catch any heat from your Suron hating peers around you, you can just take them off and the bike looks really clean. It just looks like a normal mountain bike, but the shrouds are better to have on sheerly just for protection of the frame if you crash. When I first saw the GASGAS ECC5 and I held it in my hand and then eventually got to ride on it for a split second, and just in riding it around the parking lot and hopping the curve, just feeling the suspension, feeling all the componentry, the seamlessness, and the overall feel of the bike, how different it felt from anything else I had ridden. Just, I had questions. So many. Mainly out here in the desert, the Trek Rail runs supreme, but we gave it up for a week to try out these enduro style e-bikes and see how well they can perform out here versus the normal trail bikes we ride. The suspension is something else. It has the best small bump sensitivity that I have ever felt from any shock brand. It feels like you have 203mm of treble when you only have 170, but it does have a few other things going for it. For one, it has a full carbon frame, which cuts down on a lot of the energy transferred from the ground to the wheels. The geometry is slacked and the bike is actually fairly long. Those things actually help very much going down, but not so much going up. but even then it was still able to keep up with the other trail bikes in front of us. They were shorter, more nimble, and faster, but it wasn't such a noticeable difference that we got left behind. But really whatever discomfort we felt during the climb was immediately made up by descending, and it just felt wonderful. Almost like you didn't even need a trail to be on.
Maybe?
All right. No, look at him go.
No, he's showing it.
This bike descends like a dream. It goes down very fast and smooth. If you slap some carbon rims on this bike, it would go down even smoother and likely be a little bit more nimble and agile. But the bike is already so smooth, there's really no need to change it. But all these nice external features wouldn't be much without a really nice drivetrain. And this is about as nice as it gets. I know it may not be the most powerful or even the most efficient, but in terms of seamless shifting, good luck finding something else better. When the motor and the derailleur talk to each other, you can smash gears on a load, the craziest load going uphill, and it doesn't matter. It's got the most seamless, flawless shifting I've ever had. But it doesn't just stop there. Apparently, it has an automatic feature, so you can have an automatic drivetrain. Now, I don't think this is terribly useful on the terrain you just saw, but in like a steady climb, where you don't really have to worry about it, you can just have it shift by itself. And you can also tune how aggressive or regressive you want the shifting to be. This would definitely take some getting used to, but it is now an option for people who have been wondering if automatic transmissions for mountain bikes like this exist. They do. I think it would probably be very useful on the downhill when you don't want to worry about shifting and you're going through really fast technical spots, but I really don't know how well that's going to work in the climb. Like, I'm personally not going to use it for stuff like this, or for stuff where there's constant whoop-de-doos and switchbacks and constant climbs to descents. I think the automatic training would get a little bit monotonous, but it's still there for those who want to learn to perfect it. I will also say that because I had ridden other e-bikes, that I did not like this one really at first because of just how different it was from any other e-bike I've ridden. I didn't start liking it until the end of the second ride, and by the third ride I was hooked because of how fast it was and just how many things it could do. And then when I tried my other e-bikes, they now felt foreign. So it's definitely a bike of its own. So now that we know that it at least has the ability to hang out with higher end trail e-bikes, how does it compare to something its own size? How does it do against other enduro e-bikes and even a downhill bike? Let's find out. Sunrise Park is a ski resort turned mountain bike park during the summer, and we're going to go ahead and try all three of these: a downhill bike, the Husk, and of course the GASGAS. And I'll give you my opinion on how it sizes up to the other two. The Heartcross 5 has an equivalent motor, the same rims, and the best Fox factory suspension you can get for a hard-hitting bike. This is the Husqvarna Heartcross 5. It's the only other enduro-style e-bike that I have to compare it. And I think it's a pretty good one because it's an already very established kind of platform in the enduro e-bike section with the 180 in the front, 170 in the rear, mullet style. They took all the top e-bikes out there from big brands, and one very similar to this one won. And if you ever get to ride one, I mean, they all got to be fairly similar. It's pretty easy to figure out why. It's very fast down the hill, and it's also very nimble climbing up. It's kind of more like a beefed up trail bike design that just gives you a little bit more confidence and a little bit extra power to push down stuff like this without worrying about ping-ponging or flying off the hill. But it's got very comparable geometry and length to that of a higher end e-trail bike. And what that means is it's pretty good at being universally good at everything, but it's like a jack of all trades. It's not really a master of any one section. It's just a very, very good all-around bike platform. That's probably why it's so popular. But if you wanted something that just dominated in excelling up in climbing, this wouldn't be my first choice. And if you wanted something that was just all around way fast down the hill, this was not necessarily going to win there either. So let's take one that's specifically made to win downhill. Like this bike, for instance, a full downhill bike. This is a Trek Session. It's a full 27.5 downhill bike with 8 inches of travel front and rear. So we went ahead and sent it through the mountains to see what it did. And man, was it fun. It didn't have the 29er up front, so, you know, that whole rolling prowess of it kind of going faster and smoother with just that big wheel wasn't there. But The geometry was there, and more importantly, the suspension was there to match the geometry. So this bike absolutely flew, not to mention it felt like nothing. I mean, a downhill bike is generally heavy to most people, but after you ride e-bikes for a while, this thing feels like the lightest cross-country bike ever. You can kind of fling it around everywhere. You have like super strength. You don't even know where it came from. The bike was so fun that I was probably going to ride it the whole day, but then I crashed it a few times and it stopped working the way it was supposed to work. So I had enough testing on it, so I went to trade it in for the GASGAS.
Oh, nice. GASGAS.
Yeah, buddy.
You like this?
Oh, yeah, yeah. You try it right now.
Yeah.
Let me unlock it.
So are you riding this on the
I'm going
shit
to.
we just were on?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay.
I'll write it right down there.
Alright, so how does a full carbon, ultra slacked, extra long, full 29er do against the other two? Well, right now, I'm just cruising, and already it's fast. I'm not even trying to even gain speed, and it just goes. Its small bump sensitivity eats up every last little bit of those tiny rocks, and it just glides right over them. And the more your front fork and rear shock can seamlessly glide over all that small stuff, the faster you go. It's almost like riding on single track. It's like if you ever tried to cut across a track to pass a slow person who wouldn't get out of the way, but the sheer amount of bumps kind of slowed you down and you couldn't get ahead of them. It's kind of that principle, only with this bike you probably could just smoke them. You can go right across, no trail, and this bike will go fast. It also just stays glued to the ground. A heavier bike does help you downhill. So the gentleman in front of me is actually pretty in shape and pretty skilled, and he's on an enduro bike himself, a Trek Slash, and he's actually cooking it. I had a hard time catching him in the Trek section. There were some points where he took off and I couldn't catch up to him. But right now I'm actually having to brake, and I'm not even on the pedals. And there were some sections where it would just flattened out and even some slight uphill, and I just breezed through that obviously here. By the time I was done with the run or two that I was able to do with this bike, I had only used less than 10% of the battery. I did like my 2.6 in the front with my 2.5 in the rear. Again, it's all about application, but I noticed the most negligible difference in rolling resistance. I think the 2.5s do feel slightly lighter, a little bit more playful, maybe a little bit more nimble, but their ability to control the terrain at high speeds is not the same. So I think the 2.6 Maxxis Assegai with a double down casing in the front really made the bike just come alive that much more. I do miss the mullet in the back. The angular momentum of a 29er wheel is a little bit harder to turn and whip around, but man, does a 29er with the proper suspension roll down the hill fast. I guess you just got to take the good with the bad. You're just not going to get a full win everywhere, but the wins that you want the most focus on, just go with that. And for the longest time in the downhill community, there was the biggest war between 29er and 27.5, which one was actually better down the hill. And there was just a solid argument that though the 29er wasn't as nimble, it was faster down the hill. But what you find is that people just got used to the bike. People got used to a 29er, and they figured out how to turn it and whip it around like they used to with the 27.5. And because of that, the 29er is more and more present on all downhill bikes, where you're starting to see full 29ers, not even mullets anymore. But either way you look at it, this bike was the fastest of the three. It was faster than that Husk, and it was also faster than the downhill bike. And then once you get used to the bike's geometry and all its characteristics, you really kind of start to own it, and it just becomes a part of you. I don't know what else to say, but it's fun. It's quickly become my favorite bike to use. But I do have some gripes about it. For one, I think the battery is a little too small because that Bros motor is hungry. I think a 720 watt hour battery would be much more appropriate for the bike. I would have also liked to see some carbon rims on it, but that's an upgrade that I can do to the bike later. I mean, the bike has to be at a fair price point. It's already fairly up there in terms of bikes, but they do have more affordable enduro/trail e-bikes with a much higher density of value, like these aluminum models. I know we're focusing on the ECC, which is Enduro Comp Carbon. I think that's what it stands for, but they also have the ECA and the G Enduro, and let's compare those because those are substantially less than the ECC6 and even the ECC5. Here we are, the Enduro 3.0 and the ECA 3, At first glance, you can't even tell the difference in the frame, but let's go ahead and look at the ECA3, which is their top line. They also have a 2-in-1, which they're about $1,000 difference as you go down, but they have really nice componentry. It's actually very generous for the price. I'm surprised. Man, how did I not know about this one? And here, let's check out the G-Enduro, which, I don't know, kind of looks like that one, but just with a better paint job. Same Yamaha PWX3 full-powered motor, same Fox factory suspension, same SRAM Code R, same everything, even the same price. I can't really, look at geometry. Let's see if there's any difference. If we're looking at the models, don't get confused because small is on the right over here when it's on the left on this side. So the only difference that I can see running through all these specs is the top tube is longer on the G-Enduro, and more or less all the other specs are the exact same. Now, I don't actually know what that does for the bike. I don't know enough to know what edge a longer top tube gives you. And when we look at the ECC specs for geometry, they're like not the same at all. They're different everywhere. But all the ECC models are seriously over the top. The ECC4 is actually not terribly priced. It's right here at $699, and it has pretty good components. It's got the RockShox Zeb, the Super Deluxe Select. Those are pretty good components. These components are actually on a lot of the top model high-end bikes that are thousands and thousands of dollars more. So when I actually saw that the Zeb and this shock were like at the lowest model and that DVO took precedence over the Zeb, I was obviously I was intrigued by that. The SRAM DB8 brakes are pretty good. Sometimes I can't even tell the difference between them and the codes. It does come with a regular SRAM GX Eagle drivetrain, which, to be fair, the SRAM Eagle manual drivetrains do actually very well on e-bikes, a little bit better than I would say XT drivetrains. It's much easier to shred the drivetrain with an XT versus the Eagle drivetrains from SRAM, which are like one click up and one click down, which do help you with the variance and shifting just under the power of the e-bike torque. Now, the DVO suspension, in my personal opinion, I want to emphasize on personal opinion, after using it, it's better than Fox and RockShox. I probably would have put it against those on the top end models like this. I think it was a smart move. I did try out the ECC5, which had the Onyx D1 38mm SL cone valve, the whole thing. And that was a pretty good feeling fork. But then I also, on mine, it had the Onyx D1 CV OTT. So it had one more thing. So the OTT adjuster is what allows you to fine tune that small bump sensitivity without affecting the rest of the fork. Only one fork has it. The SL models do not. Looking at the DVO website, the OTT fork is not even like available for sale. It's just the SLs. So the OTT, I think, is very exclusive to the ECC6. The RockShox reverb by itself is an extremely expensive dropper post. It's because it's the only one that's Bluetooth of its kind, I think. And you were able to pair that dropper post right to one of the SRAM pods, also with the mode selection switch. So everything was integrated in Bluetooth wireless except for the brake lines. And though most would agree that the GX Axis T-Type is very comparable in performance initially to the XO T-Type, they would also agree that the XO T-Type over time is much more durable and consistent. So more or less just paying for the OTT, the XO drivetrain, and the dropper post. Those are the three major differences between the ECC5 and ECC6. Is it worth all that many thousands of dollars more than the ECC5? Well, that's really up to the individual. For me, as somebody who's older and a little less robust, the smoothness offers you a little bit more control and way less fatigue over time, so yeah, it's worth it to me. Problems I've had with the bike so far, the shrouds like to bust off and fly off the bike when my shin pads hit the sides, so I super glued them together. And they don't fly off anymore, but they're still kind of in the way. So I don't know, whatever. You could just run the bike naked if you're confident you're not going to crash. But for me, there's a lot of crashing. So I probably will try to keep them on as much as possible. I give this bike a 9 out of 10. The things that make it a 9 instead of an 8 or a 7 was that the suspension was so good and the complete SRAM Bluetooth powertrain was so precise and smooth. The only thing that could improve on this bike would be a bigger battery because that SRAM Bros motor is hungry. And after 10 miles, the battery is already down to 50% on the max mode. So for any real long ride, you're either going to have to get an additional battery or a range extender. Could have also used some carbon rims, but then this bike would be more like 13,000 or up and not like 11. So you know what, you got to take the bad with the good and just be happy with what you have. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. If you found this video useful, please hit that like button. Enjoy your ride, whatever you're in. See you out there.